My name is Lyria Sorel. I am 25 years old. This is my voice, calm, measured, and unflinching, telling you the life I woke up from, the marriage I had already lived inside for years before I learned what I was really worth, and the secret my mother buried that traded me like a ledger entry. Read this as a confession or as a manual. Either way, remember, I speak as someone who kept receipts. The hotel corridor smelled of lemon polish and 100 small vanities. Outside the ballroom, laughter rose like steam. Inside, a fold of silk lay limp across my knees while my mother adjusted a stray pin with a surgeon's patience. She said it as though nomming a coat. "You will wear it and smile. That is the job." I was already married, and the ceremonial band on my finger had been resting there for 3 years. The scandal that begins a story did not begin on that stage. It began in the way they treated my life as something lent rather than lived. Some cages look like celebrations. As she straightened the collar, she tapped the inside seam, a tiny stitch she had sewn the night before, a stitch that hid an envelope. I found the envelope later that night. Inside, a photocopy of a contract with my name and a beneficiary I had never met. The paper was official, stamped, dated. My signature sat at the bottom like a ghost I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I read the terms: assets, transfers, guardianship clauses, words that turned a person into property. I sat on the bathroom floor until dawn, the contract pressed against my chest, trying to understand how my own mother had sold me in ink and silence. "I'm Lyria," I say into the camera of your imagination, because names are where stories begin. I was 21 when the papers were finalized. I am 25 telling you what those years felt like. I learned early to speak softly. My voice had been taught to live in the margins. At breakfast, my husband, Corvin Merck, would call me by a pet name I did not recognize from any childhood. At family dinners, my mother, Marcel Voss, would laugh and tell a story about good matches, as if humans were recipes. The first lie wasn't the signature, it was the story they made about me. The clincher came when I found a forged medical report in a file labeled with my maiden name, the report that had been used to explain why I didn't protest. The diagnosis was a label I had not been allowed to read: anxiety disorder with dependent features. Recommended supervision. The words were clinical, cold, designed to make me sound incapable of my own decisions. But I had never seen a psychiatrist. I had never been diagnosed with anything. The signature at the bottom belonged to a doctor I'd never met, paid by people who needed me compliant. That's when I understood. They hadn't just controlled my present, they had rewritten my past. One afternoon, a folded note slid beneath my bedroom door. "He breaks what he owns." It was unsigned, but the stroke of the G in breaks was familiar, the very same looped G Marcel made when she wrote checks. I kept the note pressed to my chest until the bruises stopped stinging that evening. I had to learn to feel both the ache and the calculation at once. Silence is never empty. It's filled with someone's unfinished story. In my bedside drawer, I found a photograph tucked behind an old receipt, my mother and Corvin at a lake, smiling with an intimacy that had been airbrushed out of every family anecdote I'd been told. They stood close, too close for acquaintances. His hand rested on her shoulder in a way that suggested history, not politeness. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in Marcel's handwriting, before it was decided, summer 2014. 2 years before I met Corvin. The world tilted. My marriage hadn't been arranged, it had been planned, calculated. My mother and my husband had known each other long before I was introduced to him at that charity dinner where he'd seemed so charming, so interested in me. I had never chosen him, they had chosen me. The first time Corvin burned something of mine, he did it like a man doing small arithmetic. He held my passport over the candle on his desk until the corner blackened, and he blew it out with the impatience of a man closing a ledger. "You won't need to run," he said, as if a destination could be erased by flame. I learned that people who plan for control are always polite about it. Some fires aren't meant to warm you. That same week, I found a clause attached to our marriage certificate. Guardian of assets, his name printed in a judge-calm font. The clause was stamped with an approval date from the year I turned 19, 2 years before we were married. 2 years before I even knew his name. The guardian clause meant he controlled everything I owned. Bank accounts I'd inherited from my grandmother. The small trust fund my father had left me. Even the apartment I thought was mine, all of it legally belonged to him. I had been legally owned before I was legally married. The precision of it made me sick. This wasn't impulsive cruelty. This was architectural. Someone had drawn blueprints for my captivity years in advance. And the only person who could have initiated those documents was my mother. Corvin's power was often a series of very small rules. No unexpected visitors, no unsupervised telephone conversations, no leaving the city without written permission. He learned the art of making hunger into etiquette, not asking for things, but simply removing them. You adapt. You learn what can be asked for in halves. I learned to ask for 1 hour alone and to spend it memorizing the grooves in the study door, the pattern of the safe, the sound the key made when turned. I wasn't a wife. I was an entry in someone's ledger. In that hour, I found a woman's shoe in the back of the wardrobe, not mine, not Marcel's. It belonged to Sabine Leto, whom I later learned was the mistress, and more quietly, a partner in the mind games that had been written around me. The shoe was expensive, designer, the kind women wear to events where appearances matter more than comfort. I held it like evidence, because that's what it was. Sabine wasn't just Corvin's affair. She was part of the system. I found her name later on corporate documents, listed as a consultant for the shell company registered under my name. She wasn't sleeping with my husband out of passion. She was sleeping with him for profit. And my mother knew. The three of them, Marcel, Corvin, Sabine, had built an empire on my stolen identity. Sabine wore her cruelty like perfume, light, lingering, intoxicating. She sat across from me at tea and said, in a voice that never raised, "Don't be afraid, Lyria. It's easier if you accept what you are." There was a talent to her disdain. She made ownership sound affectionate. I spent nights replaying her words, learning to treat them as evidence. Betrayal isn't sharp, it's warm. Familiar. Sabine forgot once. She said Corvin's childhood nickname on the phone, the same nickname that appeared in an old letter I later found in Marcel's handwriting. The world contracted. The people who held power were more intimately connected than they'd let on. I started documenting everything. Every phone call Sabine made when she thought I wasn't listening. Every time Corvin mentioned the arrangement in passing. Every moment Marcel's mask slipped and she spoke to me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be loved. I bought a small recorder from an electronics shop, paying in cash so there'd be no credit card trail. I hid it in the study, in the kitchen, in the bedroom. I became a collector of truths they thought were secrets. Because I understood something they didn't. Evidence doesn't need to be dramatic. It just needs to be consistent. Sometimes the missing hours are the cruelest kind of theft. I woke one morning with flecks of a color I didn't recognize on my sleeve and a memory that felt like a cracked mirror. In the guest room, I found a drawer with tiny glass vials and a logbook with my name scrawled on the top. He had looped control through chemistry and schedules, convincing himself the intervals made me calmer. They were a trap. Control isn't always shouted. Sometimes it's injected. The logbook contained a date, a future date, and a note in Marcel's handwriting. For when she grows difficult. The word difficult felt like a verdict. I photographed every page of that logbook, every vial, every dosage note, every time stamp. The medications weren't prescribed by any doctor I'd seen. They were administered by Corvin himself, who had somehow convinced a complicit physician to provide them without my knowledge or consent. Sedatives, mood stabilizers, things designed to keep me docile, agreeable, too foggy to question. I stopped taking anything he offered. I poured coffee down the sink when he watched. I pretended to swallow pills and spat them out later. Slowly, my mind cleared, and with clarity came rage. Cold, calculated, patient rage. One night, while I pretended to read in the sitting room, I overheard Marcel on the phone. Her laughter spilled into the hall. "We did what needed to be done," she said. "The debt is paid." The calm in her voice was like someone checking off steps on a grocery list. My soul recoiled at the precision of her detachment. Love shouldn't sound like a transaction. I found a bank transfer slip folded into her coat pocket, a large sum paid to a company with a name I did not recognize. The transfer date matched the day my university fees disappeared, the fees I had begged her to help with. Instead of paying for my education, she had used that money to settle a debt. My education had been sacrificed for her financial cleanup. The company name led me down a rabbit hole. It was registered offshore in a jurisdiction known for shell corporations and money laundering, and listed as the primary beneficiary, me, Lyria Sorel, except I had never opened that company. I had never signed those documents. My identity had been stolen by the person who gave it to me. I printed every document I could find. I created a hidden folder on a secure cloud drive. I sent copies to an email address only I knew. I built a paper trail that couldn't be burned or deleted. Because I knew what was coming, and I needed to be ready. Behind a mirror in my childhood room, I found an envelope of photographs. Snapshots of Marcel with a man I only later identified as the beneficiary in my sealed envelope. They'd known each other long before I had. There were tickets and receipts in those envelopes, proof, not of affection, but of meetings where contracts had been more important than children. The past doesn't stay buried, it invoices you. Inside a folded receipt, I found a stamped clerk's mark and a name, an offshore shell company registered under my own full legal name. My life has been used like a check. The man in the photographs was Gregor Vassal, a financial consultant with a reputation for helping wealthy people hide money from tax authorities. He specialized in creating complex corporate structures that obscured ownership, and he had used me as the centerpiece. Marcel hadn't just stolen my identity for one transaction. She had built an entire financial empire using my name as the foundation. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, all registered under my legal identity, all controlled by people who weren't me. I was a ghost in my own life, a signature on documents I'd never seen, a name on accounts I couldn't access. But ghosts, I learned, can haunt back. I went into the records office in the city with a stoic face and asked for the registration details. The clerk, who expected gossip and drama, looked at me like someone who'd found a forgotten file on his desk. The company had been opened the year I turned 19, with notarized documents bearing my signature. I had not signed them. Sometimes the thief is the one who tucked you into bed. Among the papers was a photograph I'd never seen, Marcel and a lawyer, laughing, the contract in hand with my name as the linchpin. The lawyer's name was stamped on every document. Henrik Krael, a man known for bending rules until they looked like opportunities. I requested copies of everything. The clerk, sensing something wrong, made a note in his system. That note would matter later when investigators came asking questions. I walked out of that office with a folder thick enough to end careers, thick enough to destroy reputations, thick enough to reclaim my life. But I didn't go to the police. Not yet, because I knew Marcel would have contingencies. She would have lawyers who could delay, obscure, complicate. I needed something bigger, something she couldn't talk her way out of. I needed her to confess, on record, publicly. The legal shadow stretched and revealed its teeth. Old transactions, laundered invoices, an insurance settlement that named me as the beneficiary. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern. Marcel had been burying a thing for years, a criminal debt the state still had memory of. To erase the paper trail, she'd used me. Identity, signature, daughter. Sometimes the thief is the one who tucked you into bed. I found my own forged signature on a transfer that had paid off a man who, years before I was born, had accused Marcel of embezzlement. The accusation had never been public, until now. The embezzlement case dated back to 1998, when Marcel worked for a textile company. She had been accused of diverting funds into personal accounts. The case had been settled quietly, the company paid off, the accusations buried, but the debt remained. And decades later, when the creditor came calling, Marcel didn't have the money. So she used me, created a shell company in my name, funneled money through fake transactions, made it look like I was the one laundering funds. If anyone investigated, the paper trail would lead to me, not her. I was her scapegoat, her insurance policy, her sacrificial daughter. Aura, my younger sister, adored by Marcel, arrived like sunlight. She was everything I had been taught to want to be, easy, smiling, unburdened. She clasped my hands and whispered, "I thought you always chose silence." Her innocence was a wound that proved their strategy: favor one child, silence another. Favoritism blinds even those standing in the light. Aura, in a careless moment years earlier, had taken Marcel's old journal and used it to trace a poem. In doing so, she'd kept the book. The journal would later contain the bank instructions Marcel thought she'd hidden. When I showed Aura the documents, her face crumbled. "I didn't know," she kept saying. "I swear I didn't know." I believed her. Aura had been protected from the truth the same way I'd been buried in it. She was the golden child not because she was better, but because she was useful in a different way. She made Marcel look like a good mother. She was the evidence that Marcel's parenting worked, when really she'd just chosen one daughter to showcase and another to exploit. "I need your help," I told Aura. "I need you to find that journal." She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make her tell the truth." Alone in the study while Corvin attended to some business, I opened the safe I had memorized. The click, the pivot, the small perfume of leather. Inside were deeds, insurance documents, and a notarized affidavit nomming me as owner of a dormant holding company. I felt my own life as legal paper: edges, dates, clauses. Paper either protects or betrays you. If they recorded my worth, they feared my value. Between the deeds lay a typed letter with Marcel's handwriting at the bottom. "This secures us, for the children's future." The choice between us and me had been quietly erased. The holding company owned 3 properties, all purchased with money that had been laundered through the shell company registered in my name, all listed as investment properties for tax purposes, all generating rental income that went directly into Marcel's personal accounts. She had built a real estate portfolio using my stolen identity, and she'd convinced herself it was for the children's future, as if stealing from one child to enrich another was an act of maternal love. I photographed everything in that safe, every document, every deed, every forged signature, and then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Corvin would never know I'd been there, and that invisibility would be my greatest weapon. When Corvin found the safe open, his anger was a polished thing, not a blow, but a series of carefully chosen threats. He uttered phrases I had been rehearsing to a steel nerve. "You will ruin us. You will make her angry." Then, careless, he said aloud, "Your mother promised you wouldn't resist." His voice was a fuse. Pain taught me what they hoped fear would hide. He left in a hurry and took with him a box of documents he believed would silence me forever. The box contained old receipts and a sealed envelope that, to him, meant leverage. To me, later, it would mean revelation. I waited until his car disappeared down the driveway. Then I called the one person I knew could help me, Lyria Vance, a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud and identity theft. We'd met at a charity event 2 years earlier. She'd given me her card and said, "If you ever need help, call me, day or night." I never thought I'd need to, but I kept the card anyway, hidden in a book Corvin would never read. When Alara answered, I said 3 words: "I need help." She said 4 back, "I'll be right there." I slid a tiny recorder beneath the dresser floorboard that night and left it running while I made tea. I listened to their voices the way one reads a map. Sabine's laugh, Corvin's soft contempt, Marcel's cool negotiation. The voices did not know I was gathering them. Carelessness is a weapon if you can keep track of the proof. Truth speaks loudest when whispered. On an afternoon when Sabine thought the house empty, she spoke into the phone about a bribe she had orchestrated to an auditor. The name she named matched a bank that had been flagged in my mother's old accounts. The recording captured everything. Sabine's casual mention of fixing the audit report, Corvin's laughter when she described how easy it had been to pay off the auditor, Marcel's voice, calm and satisfied, This keeps us safe for another year. They thought they were invincible. They thought their money and connections made them untouchable. They forgot that truth doesn't need power. It just needs documentation. Alara listened to the recording with headphones, her face expressionless. When it ended, she looked at me and said, "This is enough, more than enough. We can take them down." "All of them?" I asked. "Every single one." I met my advocate the way caged birds meet, quickly, in a small, noisy place where conversations can drown. She was a public defender turned specialist in asset recovery with a soldier's calm. When I spoke, she did not flinch. She remembered a case connected to Marcel, a debt quietly dismissed that, in retrospect, was paid off with my forged signature. If this were theater, she said, the plot had a villain who was terrible at hiding receipts. Recognition is sometimes the beginning of rescue. She told me about an impending audit at Corvin's firm. "If it touches their books," she said, "it will touch the shell company." We planned to feed the audit exactly the right piece of information. Alara had connections with the financial crimes unit. She knew which investigators were thorough and which were lazy. She knew how to present evidence so it couldn't be ignored or dismissed. "We're going to build a case so airtight," she said, "that even the best lawyers in the country won't be able to poke holes in it." We worked in secret for 3 months, meeting in cafes, libraries, parking garages, anywhere Corvin and Marcel wouldn't think to look. We compiled documents, organized timelines, verified signatures with forensic experts. And slowly, methodically, we built a trap they would never see coming. When Corvin brought a fresh deed to the study, "Sign this and the registrar will finalize our property," he said. I took the pen he offered. I used an old trick, a special pen whose ink fades under control light. I pretended compliance while sending encrypted copies to my advocate. It felt theatrical, like a child hiding a note in a hollow book. It felt, above all, strategic. Some signatures are promises, some are illusions. He sealed the envelope himself and left it on his desk, satisfied. Pride is a poor archivist. He believed he had trapped me again. I had already mailed a copy to a secure inbox. The fatting ink was Alara's idea. "If they ever try to use that document," she explained, "it will look tampered with. It'll raise questions, and questions are what we want." Corvin took the document to his lawyer the next day. I imagine his face when, weeks later, someone points out that the signature looks strange under certain lighting. I imagine his panic when he realizes the document isn't what he thought it was. I imagine, and it makes me smile. Sabine's arrogance is her undoing. She called Corvin in the garden and used a childhood nickname that matched a phrase in Marcel's old letters. When she bragged about finalizing the transfer after the audit, she did not know an auditor would be listening with curiosity. I played the quiet host and let her speak into a voice connected to legal ears. When women whisper together, secrets unravel. Sabine, thinking herself untouchable, mentioned an offshore account that had been moved under my legal name. The advocate's eyes sharpened. The web was more tightly woven than I'd imagined. Tug one thread and a seam would open. The auditor's name was Jonas Mayer, and he was known for being incorruptible, which made Sabine's claim about bribing him even more damning. If she'd lied about bribing him, it revealed her desperation. If she'd told the truth, it would have revealed her criminality. Either way, she'd confessed to a felony. Alara contacted Jonas directly, played him the recording, and watched his face turn to stone. "I've been investigating this company for 2 years," he said quietly, "and now I finally know why the numbers never added up." Within days, Jonas expanded his audit. And once an audit expands, it devours everything in its path. The audit arrived like an indifferent storm. Notices, subpoenas, auditors who treated ledgers like bones. We fed the auditors the mistress's boast and the forged documents we'd found. Within days, the probe traced funds to the shell company registered under my name. My mother's quiet archives could no longer shield her. They audited their conscience and found my mother's ledger. The auditors called my advocate. "There's a scheduled transfer from the shell company in 3 days." We had a window. The transfer would either free the funds or be frozen. Alara moved fast. She filed an emergency injunction, claiming identity theft and fraudulent use of my legal name. The judge, reviewing the evidence, granted it immediately. The transfer was frozen. The accounts were locked. And suddenly, Marcel, Corvin, and Sabine couldn't access the money they'd stolen. Corvin called me that night, his voice shaking with rage. "What have you done?" I answered calmly. "I took back what was mine." "You'll regret this." "No," I said, "I really won't." And I hung up. We moved like accountants and architects. A provisional injunction, an emergency freeze, a trust account opened under court control, dry legal tools that smell faintly of paper and inevitability. Corvin's transfer to pay off the old debt was redirected into escrow. He could not touch it. He raged. The world called it litigation. Protection sometimes looks like paperwork, but it feels like breath. Marcel received the injunction notice, and for the first time I'd ever seen, her voice cracked when she spoke to her friend. In panic, she disclosed that she had used my identity to bury a criminal case. That admission, overheard by a journalist friend of mine, would not remain private. The journalist's name was Tamsin Ryle, and she specialized in exposing financial crimes among the wealthy. I'd contacted her weeks earlier, feeding her bits of information, letting her think she'd discovered the story herself. When Tamsin heard Marcel's panicked confession, she knew she had something big. She started digging. Within days, she'd connected Marcel to the 1998 embezzlement case. She'd found the creditor who'd been paid off with laundered money. She'd traced the shell company back to its origins. And she wrote an article that would make Marcel infamous. I asked the advocate to include Sabine's recorded confession in a legal filing. The day we filed, Corvin walked into a corporate dinner and found his company's counsel in his inbox with a link to a recording. The room had been full of polite toasts. It closed with the sound of his colleagues searching for a face to save. Humiliation is a legal instrument when paired with evidence. You can laugh at a rumor, not at a recording. In his haste to reclaim control, Corvin took the box of documents he thought would be ammunition and left the house. The box contained a notarized affidavit, one I would use to undo what had been done in my name. The affidavit was Marcel's insurance policy, a document she'd created years ago, thinking it would protect her if anyone ever questioned the transactions. Instead, it became the smoking gun that proved her guilt. The affidavit explicitly stated that she had used my identity to open accounts and conduct transactions for family financial security. It was signed, dated, and notarized, and it admitted in legal language to identity theft and fraud. When Alara saw it, she actually laughed. She documented her own crime. "This is the most beautiful piece of evidence I've ever seen." Inside Corvin's box was a notarized affidavit dated the year I was 19. My mother's signature stared back at me in my own handwriting. The affidavit recorded a transfer of assets using my legal name, the very mechanism she'd used to launder the debt. With that paper, the shells collapsed. With that paper, the registrar's records could be amended. When they think you are silent, they forget you can become the witness. I handed the affidavit to my advocate and asked, quietly, "Is this enough?" She smiled the smile of someone who'd seen similar webs fall and said, "Enough to start unraveling them, but they will fight in public." And they did. Marcel hired the best lawyers money could buy. She issued statements claiming she'd been trying to protect me. She painted herself as a concerned mother dealing with a troubled daughter. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, forged signatures, recorded confessions, the testimony of auditors, forensic accountants, and legal experts. The court didn't believe her. The public didn't believe her. Even some of her friends quietly distanced themselves. And slowly, piece by piece, her carefully constructed image crumbled. Marcel tried to salvage dignity with an interview on a morning show. She rehearsed phrases about maternal duty as though they were armor. The producers had seen the documents. The host, trained at catching evasions, asked the question that made her falter. "Madam Voss, can you explain why your daughter's name appears on transactions to repay a debt from 2006? Marcel's practiced calm crumpled like tissue. Television catches more than faces. It catches fissures. A caller recited a line from the forgery live on air, and Marcel's mouth opened as though to deny. But the caller's words matched a photocopy of the affidavit I'd sent to the station days earlier. The live silence was worse than any accusation. The interview went viral. Clips circulated on social media. Legal analysts dissected her answers on news programs. The case became national news. Marcel, who had spent her life cultivating an image of sophistication and control, became a cautionary tale, a symbol of maternal betrayal, a warning about the dangers of unchecked narcissism. She tried to disappear from public view, but it was too late. The damage was done. Her reputation was destroyed. And unlike the debts she'd tried to bury, this stain wouldn't wash away. Courtrooms have a way of converting rumor into record. The judge read line after line from the registrar. The signatures, the transfers, the notarial stamps. The contracts that had propped up my captivity were declared void where forged. Accounts were frozen. Marcel sat with her face in her hands while the public record reduced her elegant denials to ink. Justice, in its paperwork form, is slow but remorseless. Justice doesn't rush, it collects. As the verdict landed, a sealed criminal indictment was unsealed. The old fraud claim that Marcel had believed extinguished years ago. It was linked to the exact bank accounts she had used. The pages had been found in the journal Aura used to doodle in when she was small. The criminal case moved forward. Marcel was charged with identity theft, fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. Corvin was charged as an accessory. Sabine faced separate charges for bribery and conspiracy. All three hired expensive lawyers. All three pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was damning. Trials take time. Months turned into a year, but I was patient. I'd waited years for freedom. I could wait a little longer for justice. Years do something nobody's map can predict. They let you relearn what it is to be ordinary. I started a small consultancy that helps women reclaim assets and rebuild credit, a practical revenge that turns pain into architecture. Friends became a chosen family. Aura, who once called me her stern sister, sat with me as we closed one of the final court orders. Corvin lost a client, and without his reputation, sank into a small, miserable anonymity. Sabine was indicted for fraud in a separate case. She confessed, in a sort of exhausted honesty, that she'd been a second-hand participant in the same game. I did not break them. I simply showed the ledger to the world. The very night I felt ready to stop counting scars, a letter arrived, an admission from a mid-level official who had been bribed years before. He sent a single-page apology and a list of transactions that, when published, would make the public ledger even clearer. I added it to the binder labeled proof of self. I slept well. Marcel was sentenced to 8 years in prison. She served 4 before being released on parole. I never visited her. I never wrote to her. When she was released, she tried to contact me. I didn't respond. Some relationships can't be repaired. Some betrayals are too fundamental. Corvin divorced me while he was awaiting trial. I didn't contest it. I wanted nothing from him except distance. He lost his business, his reputation, his freedom. He served 3 years. Sabine fled the country before her trial. Last I heard, she was living under a fake name in Southeast Asia. I hope she looks over her shoulder for the rest of her life. Aura and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. She apologized constantly, unnecessarily. I told her she was a victim too, just in a different way. We have coffee every Sunday now. We talk about our lives, our futures, the families we'll build that look nothing like the one we escaped. My consultancy thrives. I help women who have had their identities stolen by family members, spouses, partners. I teach them how to gather evidence, how to work with lawyers, how to reclaim their names. Every woman I help feels like a small redemption, a proof that my pain wasn't pointless. I bought a small apartment with a balcony. I furnished it myself. Every piece of furniture, every picture frame, every dish, I chose it. No one controlled what I bought. No one dictated how I lived. For the first time in my life, I belonged to myself. I tell you this as plainly as I can. Bravery is not always a cinematic leap. Most of my courage came as a steady accumulation, a set of small legal steps, whispered recordings, a trusted advocate, a sister who eventually chose truth over comfort. If you suspect your name is being used without your consent, protect the little things. Your passport, your bank statements, the pen you use to sign. Keep copies. Keep a friend who will hold your journal when your hands are shaking. Learn the language of paperwork. It is a language that can free you as well as chain you. Some promises aren't broken, they're reclaimed. We are not the receipts they filed away. We are the signatures that reappear on the margins of our own lives. If you're reading this and you see yourself in my story, if someone has stolen your identity, controlled your finances, forged your signature, or made you feel like you don't own your own life, know this. You can fight back, quietly, methodically, legally. You don't need to be loud. You don't need to be dramatic. You just need to be thorough. Document everything, trust carefully, find one person who believes you, and then, step by step, take back what's yours. I was 21 when they stole my life. I was 25 when I took it back. The years between were hard, but the years after have been mine. And that ownership of my own existence, is worth everything I endured to get here. My name is Lyria Sorel, and this is my story. Not theirs, mine.